quickly we sort of really got to know each other. But when I was just 16, I suppose, and I started.
He was the quiet force behind one of the most iconic bands in music history, a man of few words but immense sound. David Gilmour, Pink Floyd's soul-drenched guitarist, rarely opened up about personal tastes. But today, he does something unexpected. He names the 5 rock women who not only inspired him, but left marks on his soul. And first on that list is the woman whose voice could make the sky cry, Joni Mitchell. They were kindred spirits in the truest sense. Both introspective, both haunted by sound and silence. Gilmour first heard Joni while driving through the English countryside, and it stopped him cold. Her ability to twist melodies into poetry spoke to something deep within him. The way she played guitar, open tunings, complex voicings, felt like an echo of his own soul. They eventually crossed paths in the 70s. At a backstage gathering in London, Joni played an early version of Coyote while David watched, mesmerized. They didn't speak much, but something passed between them. An unspoken respect, a shared loneliness. Years later, Gilmour would still list Blue as a desert island record because in Joni he saw not just a musician, but a mirror. Then came another force of nature, Stevie Nicks. Where Joni was air and water, Stevie was fire and smoke. She didn't walk into a room, she shimmered in. When Gilmour met her briefly in Los Angeles during the wild heart of the 18s, she moved like a storm wrapped in silk. Lace, boots, eyeliner heavy with stories, she was living poetry, aching and defiant all at once. The studio where they met suddenly felt enchanted, as if time paused to listen. There was talk of a collaboration that never happened, but it didn't matter. David was captivated, not just by her unmistakable voice, but by her survival. Stevie was the sound of resilience, wrapped in mysticism. Her lyrics weren't songs, they were spells cast from the ashes of everything she'd endured. What drew Gilmour in was the duality. The light she wore like armor, and the darkness she never tried to hide. She had stared down addiction, betrayal, and heartbreak, and turned each wound into a verse that danced on the edge of magic. He saw in her a kind of alchemy, pain that transformed into power, vulnerability woven into thunder. He later said it wasn't just her sound, it was her fight. The way she came back from the edge not once, but again.
I think one's fairly ambitious when you want to get on with stuff, and that sort of offer is a very hard one to turn down. And
again, for Gilmour, Stevie represented the mystical side of rock, the haunting echo of the soul that refused to break. She wasn't just an artist, she was the storm, the silence after, and the melody that lingers long after the lights go out. And then there was the flame-hailed rebel from the punk era, Chrissie Hynde. When Gilmour first saw the Pretenders live in the early 18s, he was stunned. Chrissie didn't ask for the stage. She took it like she owned every inch of it. There was no posturing, no illusion, just grit, fury, and heartbreak wrapped in 3-minute anthems. Her voice cut like broken glass through velvet, rough, but with a depth that stayed with you. They met briefly in Paris during a tribute concert and shared a bottle of red wine in the green room. She talked politics with a sharp tongue, he talked guitar pedals with soft precision. Their worlds collided for a moment, and something unexpected sparked, an unfiltered connection rooted not in genre but in guts. There was tension in their differences, but also reverence. She challenged everything that was polished about his world, and he admired that. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. Gilmour, always the introspective architect of soundscapes, was drawn to Chrissie's rawness. Her pain wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. She didn't decorate her wounds with poetry, she let them scream. It reminded him of what rock was meant to be, dangerous, disruptive, deeply human. And as he watched her storm the stage and spit truth into a mic with no care for consequence, he felt something shift. Chrissie didn't just remind David of why rock mattered, she reignited it in his blood. Because it wasn't just honest, it bled, and she never apologized for the mess it left behind. But not all admiration came from the front of the stage. Some came from behind the console, like the enigmatic genius known as Kate Bush. She was only 19 when Gilmour first heard her demo tape, crackling, imperfect, but spellbinding. What he heard wasn't just talent, it was prophecy. Ethereal, strange, theatrical. It was music from another dimension. It sounded like a whisper from the future, echoing back into a world not yet ready to hear it. He didn't just admire Kate, he believed in her with the kind of quiet conviction that changes lives. He brought her into the studio, not just to polish her songs, but to protect the rare magic they held. He fought for her when others doubted. He lifted her voice before it had even been given a stage. And when her debut single Wuthering Heights exploded into something the world had never heard before, David watched with awe. Not pride, not possessiveness, but reverence. For David, Kate Bush wasn't just a great artist, she was the embodiment of fearless creativity. A visionary who didn't chase fame but bent reality to her rhythm. She reminded him that boundaries were illusions, that the strange is often sacred, and that true art doesn't seek permission, it demands surrender. There were nights, years later, when Gilmour would put on one of her records in the dead of night and just listen. No lights, no distractions, just her voice rising like mist, pulling him back to that first spark. Because in Kate, he hadn't just discovered an artist, he had glimpsed something holy. And finally, there's one name that surprised even close fans, Patti Smith. They never collaborated, they rarely crossed paths, but Gilmour always kept a quiet admiration for the poet of punk. There was something about Patti, her rage, her stillness, her spirituality, that stirred something in him. It wasn't just her lyrics, it was her presence. A walking contradiction, fierce yet tender, grounded yet otherworldly. He once said her words felt like scripture sung through shattered glass. Gilmour would often revisit her early records during difficult creative seasons, letting her voice cut through the noise of doubt. He found solace in her defiance, in her refusal to conform, in her deep and unwavering connection to something bigger than fame. Patti's art felt ancient and urgent at the same time, like a fire that refused to burn out. In Patti, he saw rebellion with purpose, not just a scream, but a sermon, not just a fight, but a vision. He admired how she could make chaos feel sacred and silence feel electric. She didn't just perform, she summoned. And in a world where noise often drowns meaning, Patti cut through like lightning in a dark sky. She reminded David that art is not about perfection, it's about truth. And sometimes the most powerful truths come from voices that never tried to be heard. They just couldn't be silenced. Each one left a mark on David Gilmour's life, not just in sound, but in spirit. They weren't just musicians. They were mirrors, muses, and flames that flickered through the quiet corners of his journey. Joni gave him the language of longing. Stevie reminded him that wounds could sing. Chrissy handed him the raw truth of rebellion. Kate cracked open the cosmos. And Patti gave him the silence between the notes. A space where pain turned to power and shadows found grace. These weren't fleeting admirations, these were lifelong echoes that returned in the quietest hours, on long drives, in the hush before a concert, in the breath between guitar notes. In each of their voices, David heard fragments of his own heart, sometimes shattered, sometimes soaring. Their courage became his compass, their artistry a sanctuary, their flaws a reminder that greatness doesn't come polished, it comes raw, honest, and hard-earned. He didn't just listen to them, he carried them. Into every solo, every lyric, every restless dream he chased through the fog of fame. Because their music wasn't just beautiful, it was brave. It wasn't just timeless, it was timely, echoing back to him exactly when he needed it most. Because even the most legendary voices need other voices to carry them through the storm. And in these women, Gilmour found a kind of shelter, a place where vulnerability met power, where music wasn't just sound, it was salvation. A map home when he felt lost, a torch when the path went dark, and the unshakable truth that sometimes it's the voices you don't expect that save you.